Good evening and welcome to another weekly episode of Commander's Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, where we talk all things on the field, off the field about your Washington Commanders. And trust me, folks, there has been such a wave storm of action, fury of transaction and hirings and moves, especially over the last 12 hours. But before we talk about that, one of the things that we always try to start with is a little bit of off the field news. And, one of the things that always happens with our team is there's always off the field news. And once Josh Harris became the owner of the Washington Commanders over the summer, there was a lot of speculation that the team might move to a more quantitative direction. Josh Harris and company, especially with all of his other pro sports teams, has always been very into the analytical side of things. And last Friday proved that to be the case. As the Washington Commanders made their first significant outside hire of the current regime that's based out of Ashburn, and they went and named Eugene Shen as the team's senior vice president of football strategy. Kind of a big title for a guy that is basically, in his new role, he's going to oversee all analytics and software development for football operations of the Washington Commanders. But more importantly, when I kind of looked at that hire for the analytical position, as we kind of knew Josh Harris was going to steer the team in that direction, because that's kind of where he goes with the Philadelphia 76ers, the New Jersey Devils, and the other operations that he's a part of. Kind of like, well, who is this Shen character, right? Eugene Shen, as I did a little bit of research, actually graduated from Harvard and has an MBA from MIT. So the dude is certainly educated and definitely knows, the analytics of things and how to go about applying that to a professional sports team. So he definitely has plenty of NFL experience. He's worked with the Baltimore Ravens from 2014 to 19 as the director of coaching analytics for them. Late 2019, Shen moved from the Baltimore Ravens to the Miami Dolphins, where he was the director of personnel analytics. And then from 21 to 22, Shen was vice president of football analytics for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So he basically took a trip up I-95 down in Florida and to oversee all of the data and analytics for the entire football operation there in Jacksonville. And of course, in Ron Rivera's daily pressers in Ashburn, he had the following statement about Shen's hiring of his analytic position. And he said, quote, bringing Eugene's level of expertise to lead our analytics and software development enables us to build on our data capabilities to help inform decision making. Eugene brings a great deal of practical NFL experience, and we look forward to bringing him into our conversations about the vision of our team going forward. The willingness of our ownership group to follow through on their pledge to allocate resources to data and analytics is exciting for the future of our franchise. And, one of the things that kind of makes it unique was, and this is where it's going to remain to be seen, is Ron Rivera and company, not necessarily Eric Bieniemy, but Ron Rivera, JDR, and a bunch of the assistant coaches are of the old school regime that, they're not a whole lot into the whole analytics and percentages and everything that boils down to when it comes to play calling and, and what happens and what is going to transpire with the team. So it'll be interesting to see how Shen's transition into this new position is going to affect operations and, basically the X's and O's of Ron Rivera, EB, and JDR and game planning and game execution, right? And one of the questions that gets brought up all the time is, how will better analytics help the Washington Commanders? So in simple terms, and it's something that, I kind of had to educate myself on because I'm not an overly big analytics guy myself, especially in professional football. But, in simple terms, in NFL games, they use the numbers and stats to make some smart decisions. And here's how they do that, right? So they find the mismatches and they look for situations where one team has the advantage, like, say, a tall receiver facing a short defender, or a guy that matches up strictly better in man to man versus zone coverage, or something like that, where they can find the mismatch between coverage guys, say slot guys on linebackers, tight ends on certain linebackers, yada, 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 to go that. So that way, then when they see this, they can decide on plays that can exploit that advantage. Whether that's calling a double play in the huddle that allows the quarterback to kill the first play, go to the second play, make the audible, or if it's just a straight play call because they know they're going to get that matchup in a certain down and distance for the offense or the defense, right? Then the second part is guessing plays. So they try to predict what the other team's going to do based on the situation, which I kind of alluded to earlier, right? That, if they have first and 10, second and long, second and short, third and long, by using the analytics and predictors and basically what they see on film, they can kind of predict what the defense is going to do in their certain situations, or what coverages they're going to be showing after, moving people around, and what they're going to be doing in certain defensive situations. Third, checking if the plays work. They look at how well a play is doing based off of what the offensive coordinator calls, what EB is going to be scheming and his adjustments that need to be made for what the offense is executing versus what the defense is doing in reaction to those plays. So, basically it's how well a play is doing, how many yards did they gain, how many yards did they lose, how likely are they going to win after that play, was that play successful that it could be called again or should be called again, maybe in a different formation, different motion set, etc. This helps the coaches decide what to do next and kind of helps them guide a little bit further down, like on the next drive, offensive drive. So, for example, on fourth down, they use the numbers and analytics to decide if it's better to go for the touchdown, better to kick a field goal, better to punt the ball, that kind of deal, right? There's usually some data decisions, or the data to help drive the decisions of what the coaches decide on fourth down. Number two, in the red zone, in that 20-yard key area, to figure out which plays work best when they're close to scoring the touchdown. Hey, are we better at running the ball in the red zone? Are we better at passing? What passing formation? What passing routes? Yada, yada, yada. End of the half, whether it's first half, second half, they use the stats to see how much time they need to score the plays before the end of the half when they're in the 2-minute drill. This helps them manage the time left in a game wisely, which, as we know, sometimes can be the downfall of our Washington Commanders, that we're not necessarily the best in our 2-minute offense or game management at the end of the first half or end of the second half, especially. And so then the biggest question is, when will we see a difference in this philosophy change going to a more analytic driven based system, right? And how apt are the coaches going to be to engrossing themselves within the analytics world to, help them hopefully be more productive in, what's going to happen. And, it'll certainly be interesting. So, I don't think we saw enough of that to have an effect or a change this past weekend against Philly down in Landover, which we're going to talk about later on tonight in that recap. But I think you may start to see something as we go into the game against New England this weekend, as well as the games afterward, kind of moving forward. It's something that I definitely think you're going to see, even as a fan or a casual observer, a difference in how game is being managed and played, and more importantly, being called, especially offensively, but even on the defensive side of the ball. But as we know, the most excitement and the most news has basically been garnered over the last, let's see, we're about 6:40 here Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday night. The news started breaking about noon today, give or take. As we know, today was the NFL trade deadline, where teams had up until 4 p.m. this afternoon to shift players around from team to team, make, put deals in place that may either A, unload salary cap for them, B, return draft capital for next year or 2025, or C, just kind of rework and fill some holes that are needed or any other needs that the team may have. And, at this point in time, the mantra of the Commanders under Ron Rivera's the last 4 years has always been to kind of stay where they are, not ruffle any feathers, not make big changes, kind of ride or die with the team that they have, regardless of the holes they need, the skill level they have or don't have for that matter, and kind of let the cards fall where they may for the second half of the season. But, as we knew, we were getting new ownership this year, and the question was going to be how soon was it going to be for the new ownership group to kind of put their stamp on some roster moves, knowing that as head coach and, even though he's not GM, he does have personnel say and personnel decisions along with Martin Mayhew, the GM that he brought over from Carolina. Well, how much would there be some contesting between ownership and management personnel, right? So the first big move of the day, we kind of knew one of these two was going to happen. And as we talk about it here in a couple of minutes, they both happened, which was kind of a surprise. But, the first move that happened at around 11:30, 11:45 this morning was Montez Sweat, defensive end, edge rusher extraordinaire, 27 years old, was traded from the Commanders to Chicago Bears for a second-round draft pick in 2024. So kind of what precipitated this was Montez Sweat does not have a fifth-year option and is actually going to become a free agent at the end of the season. So they kind of knew that they weren't going to be able to re-sign Sweat and Chase Young, and they also decided to decline the fifth-year option of Chase Young before the season started. So all the fans in DC media kind of knew that one and or both of these guys weren't going to be around in 2024. So even though Montez Sweat was more productive this season, last season, especially because, there was an absence of Chase Young because of his ACL injury, I think they knew that they weren't going to necessarily be able to come to a long-term deal with Montez Sweat. So it's going to be like, hey, let's start dealing him and see what we can get for him. I actually read something late this afternoon, early this evening, that said they wanted to trade Chase Young more than Montez Sweat. However, they thought they were going to be able to get more for Sweat than what they were Young, which is why they decided to deal him first. Something that was super ironic was, I think it was late last night, super early this morning. Take it for what it's worth. If you looked up Montez Sweat on Wikipedia, it already had him as a player for the Chicago Bears, which was super interesting once the news broke that the deal had actually been brokered. But, trading Montez Sweat away for future picks is far more important than when the staff changes get made. So, look, the new owners are in the building and they're building for the future, and that future is now. So that was kind of the first big one, was that, Montez Sweat domino dropping, and now we have a hole to be filled at one of the defensive end edge rush positions. And we kind of knew, or at least I knew, kind of deep down personally, that look, they're not going to get rid of John Allen, they're not going to get rid of Deron Payne. They just signed both of those guys to 4-year, long-term, expensive extensions. So they're not going to get rid of those guys inside. But these guys are kind of more expendable, like I said, because they kind of knew that in the long run, they weren't going to be signing these guys to long-term contract extensions. So then you get the perspective from the fans in the DC media that says, oh my God, you traded two of our better defenders away. How can you do that? Oh, we're tanking. We're going into the rebuild, yada, yada, yada. You didn't get very much. You got basically a can of beans and a draft pick for the guy. But then I guarantee, as I was talking to Dan off camera before the show tonight, that those same fans, if you play the rest of the season with these two guys walk to other teams, sign long-term contracts. These people are going to be the first ones to bitch and moan that the team didn't trade them at the deadline, didn't get any draft picks, didn't get anything in return, didn't try to develop other guys into that position or those roles that they vacated at the trade deadline. So, and I go to many NFL and team insiders for a lot of this trade deadline information. And as always, one of the guys that I reference a lot is Grant Paulson from 1067 The Fan out of DC. And he even posted along to kind of verify some of those rumors, so to speak, that, look, from what he was told, the Commanders preferred to trade Young. We got the better offer for Montez Sweat. So it stands to reason they found it hard to say no when a bad team is giving up a number 2 pick, right? They may have just acquired a top 35 selection for a Washington player when it wasn't sure that they were going to even retain that player to begin with, which we're going to talk about in a little bit here in the next couple of minutes about the draft capital that they did acquire. So, it's interesting because that Montez Sweat trade says more about Josh Harris's vision than it does about Ron Rivera. As we all know, this is Ron Rivera's basically year to, prove that he should be staying. There's a lot of speculation that, look, even short of going deep into the playoffs, which we pretty much know, let's be honest, we still got to have the season, but we're not going to be doing that. We just don't have the team to do that. That Rivera is going to be gone at the end of the season. So, there's definitely a lot of speculation and conjure about what's going to happen between ownership and head coach, right? So Josh Harris didn't pay $6.05 billion for a franchise to chase wild card playoff spots, right? Harris wants to compete for championships, even if that title may take some time. And it was interesting that him and the other ownership members, Mitchell Rales, Magic Johnson, and others, basically came to the conclusion that, hey, look, let's just start the rebuild now. And, even though a lot of us diehard fans are going to say, look, we've been rebuilding for years and even decades, that, it's the right thing to do. Let's do the rebuild the whole way, and this is where it's going to start. So it'll be interesting to see what the next 8 to 9 games bring. And then especially this offseason is going to be super important, right? But trading Montez Sweat to Chicago in exchange for a 2024 second-round pick doesn't make Washington better for a Week 9 matchup against the New England Patriots, which we're going to talk about at the end of the show, or make them better against the Week 13 matchup against Miami, right? Because we know that these are all have the potential to be pretty good offenses against what is now going to be a Swiss cheese defense. Sweat was a good player. He helped the Commanders, basically now and in the present. But trading him away, like I just said, is all about building for the future. But it's always been kind of the Harris plan in other teams that, and even, kind of as we look at most currently the Philadelphia 76ers, where he enacted a process, right? And, it was I don't want to say it was necessarily a tanking process, even though some of it probably was just because of the caliber of players they have. But it was a process of where he makes the moves to break down in that case, the basketball roster of the 76ers, acquire a bunch of high draft picks, and then build back a true title contender, which, Philadelphia's kind of been there, deep into the playoffs, Eastern Conference Finals, haven't quite made the push yet, but they have the potential to do it. Real quick, I'll give a shout out to my buddy Paul there, just chimed in. Hey, happy Halloween, brother. You too. I know you got football practice tonight, grinding them little fellas out there instead of trick-or-treating, but it's all good, right? So, it's interesting that, what's going to happen with this vision, right? And where they're going to go. So then it kind of begs the question that we thought one of the pieces was going to be gone. But then lo and behold, a couple hours later, holy shit, the team ended up trading Chase Young. Former number 2 overall pick out of Ohio State, got traded to the San Francisco 49ers. Not like they needed any more people to bolster that stellar defense, especially that front four that they have out there with Bosa and, all the other guys in their great linebacking core. But, between Warner and I was going to say Ward in the back and some of the other guys that they got over there, but they traded Chase Young to the 49ers for what is going to be amount to be a third round draft pick. So now that basically leaves both edges, defensive ends open for the Washington Commanders by making both of those trades today. But, as I said earlier, there's some conjure and speculation that Chase Young didn't even want to sign a long-term deal here at the end of the season anyhow, after his fifth-year option was declined. He was going to test the free agent market and more than likely go elsewhere. So basically they saw it as, hey, look, we need to unload that asset, get some draft capital before he walks with nothing to show, right? So where that kind of comes in and becomes such a huge deal for us is, kind of twofold, right? That in the common draft era for the Washington Commanders, or the Washington franchise, actually, as we go back, since the common draft era, Washington has never, that's kind of the key phrase there, has never made 5 picks in the first 3 rounds of a draft. So the draft is a long ways from right now, but the team is already up to those 5 draft picks in the first 3 rounds and has a lot of flexibility as we reshape our roster, right? So it's kind of begs the question, where do we go from here? So obviously the immediate needs is, we have 2 immediate holes to fill on the defensive ends and the edge rushing, so to speak. But then it kind of, says, well, who's going to fill those spots? Who's going to be plugged in where? What are we doing long term? Yada, yada, yada. But something that we can kind of take some solace in is this and the following, right? So that as of right now in 2024 draft next April, we're going to have our first round draft pick. Probably, let's be honest, it's probably going to be somewhere around number 10. Maybe, I hope we don't break the top 10, but we very well could break the top 10 and be like somewhere 7 to 10. But more than likely, we're going to be in that 7 to 15 window. And I wouldn't be surprised if we are around number 10. So we're going to get a top 10 draft pick. Then we're going to get our second round draft pick. And then we're also going to get a second round draft pick, which is going to be from Chicago. The nice thing about this is that this second round draft pick from Chicago is going to be a fairly early second round. So you could basically even call that like a late first round draft pick just because of how bad the Bears are going to be. I think the bottom of the league is going to be either Arizona or Chicago. So, that extra pick that we just traded or got in the trade from Montez Sweat could prove to be pretty valuable for us. Then we have our regular third round pick, and then we're basically going to get another third round pick in a San Francisco trade for Chase Young. So we got some potential that gives us a lot of good quality players in the 2024 draft. And trust me, once we get towards the end of the season and, guys are knocking out their mock drafts left and right, it's going to be super interesting to see who's declaring for the draft, what needs we hope we have besides offensive line and linebacker, and, kind of going from there, right? But one of the things that's even super nice is the fact that we have something to the tune of like $90 million in cap space, but we also have 21 guys who are unrestricted free agents, 23 counting the 2 that we just traded. So it'll definitely bring up a lot of interesting decisions about who we re-sign, who gets long-term contracts, who we bring back for that 1-year deal, prove it and sign it deals, and kind of the likes, right? I think that half the list is probably going to be brought back, if nothing else, just for depth, and definitely have some starters on that list. So it'll be interesting to see what the team decides to do kind of as we go forward and what goes on, right? But it kind of goes to show what happens the trade deadline today definitely dictates where the team is going to be headed and directed. So Diana Rossini posted out today that she was told that Washington ownership had that strong hand in deciding to deal both Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Many in the building wanted to keep them because they believe in this team and who they are, and the fact that we spent basically 4 straight first-round draft picks on defensive line guys, right? But in the end, it was all about the future of the Commanders, and the new ownership group had, basically the final decision and what we're going to do and where we're going. So, as we said, where do we go from here? The defensive end that are on the Commanders' active roster right now, after we traded Chase Young and Montez Sweat earlier today, is Casey Toohill. Casey Toohill balled out in the last two games, even though we lost in the last two games. That kid, stepped up, next man up, had a great game, and kind of proved why he was definitely in that defensive front rotation. So I definitely feel like he's going to be getting tabbed to start on one side or the other. I don't know if he has a specific strong side, left or right, but don't be surprised if he starts this week against the New England Patriots. James Smith-Williams is another one. Obata is another. Andre Jones Jr. and KJ Henry. We did get Mathis back just as a help to rotate through the defensive line interior with Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne. So that'll definitely be a big one there. Don't be surprised if we pull somebody from the practice squad as well to fill one of those two roster spots. I'm not sure if they're going to fill both of those roster spots with defensive edge rush guys, or like I said, if they're going to use some of the reserve guys that we have kind of in a more prominent role, rotate them through, and then use one of the two roster spots somewhere else. But it'll definitely be interesting to see where we go and what happens, right? And, there's a lot of fans that were upset about what we got in return for the two players. But let's be honest, even though they were both former first-round draft picks, one had a torn ACL a year and a half ago, and both of them kind of underperformed in the grand scheme of things. So, calling what the Commanders got for Sweat, basically just a second-round draft pick, doesn't do it justice, right? Especially from the Bears, like I just, explained a little bit prior here. Because it's going to be a borderline first-round pick. The second-round pick could mean it's going to be in that 33, overall, a second-round pick is 33 to 64. This pick from the Chicago Bears is probably going to be in the mid-30s somewhere, which is basically, like I said, a late first-round pick. So, it's like calling a guy with money rich, right? Are you my neighbor with cool cars rich, or are you Jeff Bezos rich? So it's going to be interesting to see what we do and where we go and kind of what happens with those selections. But it's going to put the super importance of how we draft, our scouting on draft guys. And, let's be honest, I'm banking that we're going to have a new coach by then. It's probably a GM. So we're going to see how the new GM and coach do with 5 draft picks in the first 3 rounds. And, knowing the undaunting task of what they have to do and what's in front of them, kind of moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and where we go from here, right? So before we talk about our less than great game against the Philadelphia Eagles this past Sunday, let's take a quick break and talk about our sponsors here at Out of the Box Sports Network. And the first one up is Jason Fine. That's attorney Big Al at 1-800-HURT-123. For all of your motor vehicle accidents, slips and falls, workers' comps, personal injury claims, he has 3 convenient office locations, one in Philadelphia, PA, one in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, one in Pittsburgh, PA. So if you have a legal need and need to reach out to somebody, contact Jason Fine, a.k.a. attorney Big Al, at 1-800-HURT-123. One of the better sponsors here that we always like to promote is Monkey Cult Coffee, the evolution of flavor-infused coffee with their newest blend, an organic blend called Peru La Florida. You can use promo code OOTB Sports for your online discount. They got 3 flavors in bourbon chocolate chip, toasted coconut rum, and the Sumatran blend to go along with that new organic blend, Peru La Florida. So use that promo code OOTB Sports at monkeycultcoffee.com for your discount on all of your coffee needs or your coffee supply order. All right, getting back to the second half of the show tonight, we're going to recap the kind of heartbreaking loss, if you will, against the Philadelphia Eagles this past Sunday. It's kind of interesting that, we lose the games that we should win. The Chicago Bears, New York Giants come to mind first off the top of my head. But then the teams that we should lose to, or you feel like we're going to get blown out against, we do fairly well against, and we give them some good competition. And that's not other evident than both of our interdivision games so far against the Philadelphia Eagles, both in week 4, week 5, up at Lincoln Financial, and then this past Sunday at FedEx Field down in Maryland, right? And we looked really good coming out of the gate against the Philadelphia Eagles this past Sunday, but in the end it came down to our defense giving up a lot of points, giving up some big plays, and let's just call it as it is, some shitty calls from the referees along the way that kind of, basically sealed our doom and gave the Eagles a 38-31 victory over the Washington Commanders. But some highlights or kind of points of note going into the game was, we did make some personnel changes going into this game, which I kind of knew were coming. Some of them were injury based, some of them were performance based. But, Cody Barton didn't play, and Sadiq Charles both went to the IR after injuries from the Giants game the week prior before Philadelphia. So, that gave us a chance to activate Mathis, the defensive tackle, and as well as elevate Jabril Cox and Castro Fields, the cornerback, to the active roster against Philadelphia. So, as I said, we started out pretty well, and, it was super interesting to see what this team was going to do against Philly. Philly's been getting their shit together. They've kind of figured out, who Philly is again, and as they get ready to go on this championship run that they did last year that took them all the way to the Super Bowl. So, in all honesty, after the dismal performance that we put up against the New York Giants the week prior, I wasn't expecting a whole lot out of our team this week against the Philadelphia Eagles, because the Philadelphia Eagles, let's be honest, are basically, if not the top, the second best team in the NFC. But like I said, we held our own. And that started straight from the quarterback. Sam Howell had basically a stellar game, a career day, as he went 39 for 52 for 397 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, and only 1 interception. So on any given day, any week of the year in the NFL, that's good enough to win a game. Unfortunately, when your defense gives up 38 points and a shit ton of yards to the opposing team, that usually spells disaster. And in this case, it certainly did, right? But, Brian Robinson led the way with 10 carries for 59 yards. And one of the biggest things that I was actually happy to see was Jahan Dotson rebounding after I don't want to say dismal game, but just kind of some mishaps that, as we know, he didn't catch the 4th down pass at the 2-yard line against the Giants that would have gave us a first down and or a touchdown to tie the game and win, possibly. But, he came out, he had 8 receptions based off of like 10 targets, I think it was, 108 yards and a touchdown. So it was nice to see him rebound after the week he had against the New York Giants. And like I said, we got out to a really hot start, and that included, Sam Howell's 26-yard touchdown pass to Terry McLaurin basically halfway through the first quarter. Philadelphia does what Philadelphia does, put some decent drives together. They went down the field. Jake Elliott kicked a 51-yard field goal. But then, lo and behold, the Commanders come right back, and that's when Jahan Dotson had his only touchdown of the game, which was a 21-yard completion from Sam Howell for touchdown number 2. But lo and behold, here comes Swole Batman, A.J. Brown, who's basically been lights out so far this year. I think in the last 7 out of 8 games, I think it is, he has had over 100 yards receiving. Something crazy like 120, 130, 190, 180. Like, it's just like next to Tyreek Hill, he's basically the best receiver in the NFL. And, he's going to get his touches. He's going to get his yards. And Jalen Hurts caught him for a 16-yard touchdown pass. Joey Sly turned around, and lo and behold, holy shit, he kicked a 61-yard field goal. That dude is basically hit or miss. I'd love to see him be hitting a lot more than he is missing, but, he came through when we needed it. 61-yard field goal right before halftime. Kicked that field goal right down the middle. Made it 17-10 Washington going into the half. This is where you kind of get worried because we know that we always have a letdown in the second half. And I was hoping that they were going to keep doing the same game plan and play calling and attack for what they did in the first half. Unfortunately, yeah, whatever. They probably didn't do that, right? And AJ Brown had another touchdown, 25 yards from Jalen Hurts in the third quarter, tied it up 17-17. Then we get the basically crazy fourth quarter. Logan Thomas touchdown pass from Sam Howell. Devontae Smith came back with a touchdown pass from Hurts. Julio Jones, who they just basically picked up off the bench from Tennessee the week prior, had a touchdown pass from Hurts. Oh, by the way, let's throw DeAndre Swift in there for a touchdown run. And then Jamison Crowder, who was, a former DC teammate of a lot of these guys we brought back this year, had a 26-yard, touchdown pass to make it the fourth touchdown pass from Sam Howell for the day to make it 38-31. Now, as I said, there are definitely some questionable calls in this game. Devontae Smith probably didn't have the catch, even though it was ruled a catch, and then that started the whole media fan, storm about, Ron Rivera. Did he, why didn't you challenge it? Claims he was looking at the jumbotron, didn't see a replay up there to change it. Didn't get a call from anybody in the booth about, hey, we should be challenging this. So, he didn't let it go. In Philly's defense, and, I make a shout out because I listen to these two guys almost every week. Jason Kelsey, along with his brother Travis, on the New Heights podcast. Give a shout out to those guys for doing such a great job, even though they are basically on enemy teams, whatever. Basically said, hey, look, we practice quick plays after controversial calls. And I don't know how many other teams truly do that, but the Philadelphia Eagles do it, and they're pretty good at it. And you can always tell that, like, when somebody thinks they didn't catch the ball, maybe have fumbled it, whatever, you'll see the Eagles run up and, try to pull off the next play before somebody can throw the red challenge flag. And that's basically what they did, right? And, it kind of is what it is. And, it certainly didn't help us that, the refs called it a complete pass. It wasn't a complete pass. And then, oh, by the way, the ruling on Jahan Dotson later in the game. It just looked like the refs were out for us, especially when I think the Eagles only had one, maybe two penalties the entire game to like our 10 or 12. But, it is what it is. And when you look at it, really, for time of possession, stats, we did what we did in the first game against the Eagles to take them all the way to overtime, and we should have won this game, wholeheartedly. We had 472 total yards to Philly's 374. Sam Howell had more passing yards than Jalen Hurts, 388, 315. We had more rushing yards. We held Philadelphia to 59 rushing yards. If we can hold the opposing team to under 100, that usually spells victory for us. But it did. We had 26 first downs to their 21. We had basically the same third down efficiency as the Eagles. We were one down off. They obviously were 1 for 1 on the fourth down with the brotherly shove. We were 0 for 3. Total plays 69-62. And time of possession we had 31 and a half to their 28 and a half. So everything statistically pointed that we should have won this game, but unfortunately the defense gave up just a couple too many big plays and points that spelled doom for us, right? So as we look at kind of a breakdown, we realize that the offense had 72 snaps to our defense's 63, right? So for once we can't say that the defense was on the field more than the offense. But when we break that down, especially down at running backs, that's one of the hot topics right now is who's the balance of who is running the ball. And AG got 51% of the snaps. B-Rob got 49. And unfortunately, Chris Rodriguez had 0, which I found kind of surprising and interesting, especially after the game he had against the New York Giants the week before. Definitely surprised he didn't get any snaps, but got to be a reason, got to be a game plan, right? It was nice to see Emmanuel Forbes back out on the field, even though he did get torched for a long play. But then it kind of goes back to, how we're scheming and playing, the opposing team's number one wide receiver, right? Why are we still sticking Emmanuel Forbes one-on-one against A.J. Brown?
why is it definitely something that, you know, isn't working, you know, well, like where's the coverage over the top from the safety to help him out and kind of go from there, right? So it's definitely something that, we expect, JDR and company to fix for that kid, but it kind of is what it is, right? As I alluded to earlier, we had 7 penalties for 79 yards to Philly's 3 for basically just over 10 yards. And Sam Howe did great. We only had one interception. So everything on paper should have said Washington victory against Philadelphia, but unfortunately it just didn't end up that way. But then that kind of brings us to, the bigger point of, next week's game, and we got to travel to Foxborough and face the New England Patriots. And one of the things that always, kind of makes it difficult is, let's be honest that Bill Belichick is great at what he does, and it's crazy that you know he has just the best approach at either rookie or second year quarterbacks that just gives them trouble and spells doom and everything else, and they're going to be hungry. They're going to be looking for a win. Miami Dolphins are, obviously one of the better teams in the AFC. They have one of the most prolific offenses in the league this year, and they won, 31-17. So it's going to be interesting to see what the New England Patriots, who are 2-6, do when we go into Foxborough next week. Mac Jones didn't have a super bad game, or he was 19 for 29, 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception against Miami, and against Miami's defense, that's not bad, right? But when you go up against Tua, who's basically throwing 45 to 55 times a game, who went 30 for 45, 324, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception, it's going to be a long day for your defense. And unfortunately, that's the way it was with those guys, right? That Miami had possession of the ball for 35 minutes. So when your defense is on the ball or is on the field that long, and against that offense is going to be giving up points, if you're not on top of your game, Mac Jones and Bill O'Brien and company, it's going to spell doom for you, right? So they only had the ball for 24 minutes in the game. They only had 13 first downs, basic shit. I mean, they only had 51 total plays. One of the things that was interesting to see was that New England gave up 3 sacks. Conversely, one of the things that was super nice about us in the Philly game was we've been letting our defenses sack Sam Howell like it's going out of style. They made some changes that on the offensive line. They brought in Tyler Larson to start at center, and they brought in Cornelius Lucas as well. And even though they had a bunch of hurried and a bunch of rushes, they only gave up 1 sack against the Philadelphia Eagles, which against that defensive unit is absolutely phenomenal. So if they can continue to play like that with the same personnel package and do the same thing that they did against the Eagles, against the Patriots, we're giving ourselves more opportunity to be successful for Sam Howell and company, right? Now, there is some question that, Curtis Samuel's on the injury report, but at the rate we've been going with Logan Thomas, Terry McLaurin, and Jahan Dotson predominantly, along with the running backs, it does set us up fairly well to have a successful day, even though we're going to be on the road. And, this is going to be a game of basically, let's call it, a toilet game, bottom of the league teams, to kind of vie for, that lonely win. Somebody's going to win. We're not going to tie like we did with the Giants last year. So I would like to think that even though we lost 2 of our better, defensive starters in Sweat and Young that obviously won't be playing on Sunday for us, I still think, that Hill and, Jones and company, along with Mathis now rotating in, and the fact of, Cox going in to linebacker, being elevated to the full roster, and Hudson and Mayo as well being at linebacker, that we're going to see, hopefully the same production, if not a little bit better. And it's definitely going to be huge for us to have that cohesion and that communication on the defensive side in order to kind of confuse Mac Jones. Because let's be honest, once you start pressuring Mac Jones and hurrying him up and rushing him and not allowing him to go through his progressions and make quick and bad decisions, then you're going to get Mac Jones turnover. And turnovers, I guess you could say, kind of have been following Mac Jones over the last year or two, right? And that's definitely what we're going to need this weekend is a couple of turnovers, whether that's fumbles, whether it's interceptions, whether it's sacks at key moments to produce third and longs and or fourth downs. It's all going to be key, right? But I ultimately think that Washington's going to be able to go up to New England and pull off a much needed victory, only to keep the naysayers down for another week. Based off of what's happening and what's going on. Look, everybody's calling for Ron Rivera to be fired. And, as much as I love the guy and I met him 2 weeks ago in person and, had him sign a helmet and he was the greatest dude in the world. And I love Ron Rivera for what he's done for our team in the last 4 years and where he's taken us from the shitstorm of Dan Snyder into the new era. Unfortunately, the time for Ron Rivera is basically up in DC. And there's going to be a coaching change. I'm never a big fan of making coaching changes in the mid-season, but unless we basically go 0-5 over the next 5 weeks, then, I probably would be that advocate. But until then, let's just wait until Black Monday and then get rid of the entire coaching staff except for EB and Ryan Kerrigan and kind of just go from there, right? So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think that, we can go up. We've been putting 30 points up almost every week, except for the week against the Giants, right? So I don't see why we can't throw another 30-pointer up. So I could definitely see us doing another 31, basically, hey, look, let's flip the score again, and we're going to be the Dolphins this week. And we're going to go up there and put a score up of 31-17, 31-20. We're going to allow New England to score some points. That's not going to be a problem. It's going to be a problem for us, but not a problem for them. They're going to score points. It's not like we're going to keep them to 10 points or less. We're not going to be doing a shutout. We're just not that kind of team. So they're going to get some points. So I definitely see this being like a 31-17, 31-20 Washington victory that kind of gets us almost back to 500 before we can continue further on in the season. So we'll definitely see what happens and kind of where we go from here, right? So as always, here at Out of the Box Sports, we have something for everybody. And as always, you can check our weekly schedule that's posted on social media. Like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and Twitch. We got team shows, especially if you're an NFC East fan, for every team, whether it's the Big Blue Power Hour, whether it's them 215 boys, the Commanders Gridiron every Tuesday night at 6:30, as you're watching now, or the Sully Squad that covers the Eagles on Monday nights. We're hot into the World Series right now. So, as always, there's Joe and Dave will cover extra innings baseball. And I think they're going to be right up after me tonight on here at 8:30. So catch them. We got college football frenzies. We got Notre Dame shows. We got the Silver and Black Lair. We got gaming shows. We got hockey that just started. If you're a Rangers fan or if you're a Capitals fan like me and you hate the Rangers, you'll still listen in anyhow just because it's a good show hosted by a good buddy, Dan. So like I said, we got something for everybody. Check out our schedule that's posted up here right now and it can be found all over our social media platforms as well as our show host sharing them like crazy. So we always have something, right? And as always, we'll see what happens with our Washington Commanders, especially after the trade deadline today when they made the significant moves on defense, didn't really do anything on offense to bolster the offensive line. Hopefully the changes that we made last week against the New York Giants will suffice. It kind of was that good combination moving forward. So hopefully we see some continued success out of that new unit of guys moving forward. And as always, thank you for tuning in. And we will see you next week. Same time, same place, and hopefully with a Victory Tuesday. Good night.